I see a lot of questions about Scottish deities. People have tried to look them up and they don't find much. So let me try to unravel this for you as I understand it. I lived in Scotland from the early 1980s until about 2009, and even before I got there, I had an inkling that I wanted to worship the old gods, but at the time I wasn't really sure who the old gods of Britain and Ireland were. This was a long time before the internet, and I had mostly lived in quite small towns in the US with limited libraries. Over the years, I found those gods, partly through books and mythology. The libraries and bookstores in Edinburgh, where I lived, were an enormous help. I think I also found the gods partly via the ambient culture, and definitely through contact with the land. I've always been a keen walker, and I was pretty much out and about every day. Edinburgh itself has some amazing walks along rivers and streams, through woodland and so on. Those don't really feel like you're in the city at all. Working as a musician, I also travelled around Britain quite a bit, and later I had horses, so I became quite intimate with the countryside through those adventures. But I was always walking, and you find a lot of personal, sacred places that way, by walking the same paths repeatedly. I never really got involved with pagan groups that much. I was always pretty busy with my career and with horses, so it was only after I returned to the US and I had more time on my hands and social media was taking off that I really started talking to a lot of other pagans. It seemed like Celtic polytheists were mostly interested in Irish deities, or occasionally you'd meet someone following Brythonic or Gaulish polytheism. People were often surprised that I had relationships with deities associated with Britain and Gaul and Ireland. Some people felt it was important to remind me that these were different language groups from different geographical places, and I think they felt I was being too eclectic or something, or that I thought Celtic was one generic culture. I don't think that. But living in southern Scotland, it all made perfect sense to me. To explain why, we're going to have to detour to a bit of history and a few maps. If you like my videos, please share them, comment, or give them a thumbs up. There's more free content on my Patreon page and on my website. If you're feeling spontaneous, you could buy me a cuppa on Ko-fi right now. All the links are below this video. First, the whole island of Britain once spoke a range of related Brythonic languages, in other words, languages related to modern Welsh. When you have a fairly cohesive linguistic group, it usually implies that there will be quite a lot of common culture and mythology within that group. Or it might be better to think of the people of Britain at that time as a bunch of small groups or tribes, speaking similar languages and having a lot of similar customs. It's really only with the arrival of the Romans that the names of deities started to be recorded in Britain. That doesn't mean the deities weren't already there, of course. One thing the Romans did, which is significant to our story, was to build a big wall called Hadrian's Wall. And this may be the origin of dividing the island of Britain into what eventually became England and Scotland. According to the Romans, the people of the north were extra fierce and barbaric. It was easier to conquer and Romanize the south first, and maybe sort the north out later. The Romans called the people north of the wall Picts, but the Picts would also have been made up of a bunch of separate tribes or factions. Although hardly any Pictish language survives, we have just enough personal names and place names to be pretty sure it was indeed a Brythonic language. Wherever they went, the Romans adopted local deities and worshipped them alongside their Roman gods. From where we stand, however, we can't always tell whether some of the deities with Celtic names were imported from Gaul by soldiers who had already been worshipping them in Gaul, or whether Britain and Gaul just had certain deities in common. Of course, the Romans were all over Britain. We find their leavings in England and Wales, and up in southern and central Scotland. Hadrian's Wall, near the Scottish-English border, was a place of heavy Roman concentration, so there's a lot of evidence about deities on altars and monuments there. Around the time the Romans left, people from Ireland, called Scots, who ultimately gave Scotland its name, started moving in, bringing their language and gods and customs with them. But the thing is, by this time, both the Britons and the Irish were increasingly Christianized, so how people viewed their gods was changing too. This is another thing which we can't see with much clarity, exactly who became Christianized when, how much they continued to worship their pre-Christian gods, and so on. It's reasonable to assume that Scotland originally shared many deities with the rest of Britain. Equally, there was always trade and cultural contact between Gaul and Britain. Come to that, it's likely that the southwestern Picts, such as the Epidai of Islay and Kintyre, formed some kind of cultural group with the Cruithin of the northeast tip of Ireland. This was before the better documented movement of people from Ireland to what is now Scotland got underway. So southern Scotland and northern England, the part of the world which feels like home to me, was very much a crossroads for different Celtic groups, bringing different deities with them to a place that already had a Celtic language and culture and religion. The Highlands and Islands and the Northeast have their own stories, but everywhere made the move from Brythonic to Goidelic or Gaelic languages and culture in its own way at different times. And I haven't even talked about the Saxons and the Vikings, who also made their mark. I know this has been a long preamble to the question, what about Scottish deities? In a way, though, I've already answered a big part of the question, the best way I know how. But let me summarize it. The earliest layer of Celtic deities worshipped in Scotland were likely to have been similar to those worshipped all over Britain. These include some who later made their way into Welsh mythology. I don't mean that there was one single culture with a single religion and pantheon, but there were likely many commonly held beliefs and deities mixed in with local ones. Certainly, those deities who appear to be cognates or reflexes from Gaul right across to Ireland, such as Lugos and Gobanos, Cathobodia, and perhaps Brigantia, they were likely known in what is now Scotland before the Romans arrived. Around the Forth estuary, there's also an area which Brythonic-speaking people called Manannán, and the name Manannán was also used as a place name there. This may have started with some very early settlers from Ireland, we don't know for sure. There's a concentration of Roman inscriptions to Maponos along Hadrian's Wall and around the Solway Firth, and also a couple of place names with Mabon in their name in the same area. Maponos was known in Gaul, while Mabon is known in Welsh literature from an early date. They're reflexes of one another. It's important not to dump all the different Celtic-speaking cultures in different times and places into a vague, generic idea in our minds. At the same time, to really understand the culture of any time or place, we need to understand how it was interacting with its neighbors and its sister cultures. I can speak more confidently about southern and especially southeastern Scotland, since that's where I used to live. I always had a very strong sense of the Brythonic gods there, and I also had a strong sense of the deities we associate with Irish or Gaelic-speaking culture. Maybe they exist in some kind of historical layers. Maybe some are stronger in certain areas where they once had important cults, or maybe they're just all mixed together now. It certainly feels very artificial to me to try to separate them. I don't perceive Scotland as some ancient extension of Wales, any more than I think of it as some kind of Ireland light. I also know that culture doesn't change abruptly when you cross the English border, or Hadrian's Wall, or even the Irish Sea. It's much more of a continuum. When modern Celtic polytheism first got going in the 1980s, it mostly happened not in Britain or Ireland, but in the US. A lot of people were fairly naive and thought that Celtic and Irish were synonymous. Now I see people trying to associate their polytheism with the names of modern nations. That works pretty well for Ireland, but not so well for Scotland, Wales, and England. Others associate themselves with the Goidelic, Gaelic, or Brythonic language group. But the thing is, statistically speaking, if you have any Scottish ancestry, it's pretty certain that you have ancestors from both linguistic traditions, not to mention speakers of Germanic languages like Old Norse, Scots, and English. That leaves us with the question, are there any exclusively Scottish deities? I'm sure there were once many, because most rivers will have had one, usually a goddess, and so will other features of the land like mountains and springs. A few names are preserved or guessed at based on river names, such as Clotta of the Clyde or Ta of the Tay. Some would also claim the Cailleach. Now, there are many Cailleach characters associated with weather, deer, mountains, or creating landscapes in folklore from different parts of Scotland. However, there are Cailleach figures in Ireland too, and a few very similar figures in Wales. Scottish folklore offers us an array of legendary figures who may or may not be deities, from saints to giants to Finn McCool. Then there's the mysterious Shawnee, to whom libations were given in Lewis and Iona, accompanied by prayers for an abundance of seaweed. Some associate Shawnee with Manannán MacLear, but that's just a possibility. As I mentioned, there are several place names associated with Manannán, where the mouth of the Forth begins to narrow, which seems to mark out a region known in Brythonic poetry as Manau Gododin. The Gododin were a tribe whose seat was probably Edinburgh and who controlled lands to the south. The gods of the Gaels and the gods of the Britons become difficult to separate. I'm not sure deities have nationalities, at least not based on our understanding of national borders today. My experience of Scotland is that Scots are incredibly welcoming, and if you want to assimilate to Scottish culture, they will accept you as one of them quite readily, and if you want to live among them and kind of hang on to the culture you brought with you, they're still welcoming and interested to know about the customs of your homeland. It's no wonder, perhaps, that so many deities have found a home in Scotland.